he thought it was just a routine stop. A quiet break on a road he'd driven countless times. But that day, General Carlton Hayes, a man who'd spent decades leading soldiers with honor, found himself treated like a criminal by someone who didn't see his rank, only his skin. What followed was a masterclass in restraint, dignity, and how the quiet strength of one man exposed a deeper truth in plain sight. This is not just a story of injustice. It's a story of how one moment, recorded on a phone. Highway 280 in Georgia was familiar territory for General Carlton Hayes. No fanfare, no uniform, just a simple drive. He wore slacks, a polo shirt, and kept his decorated jacket folded neatly in the back seat. His GPS had glitched after a recent update, so when he saw a gravel pull-off just past a small green sign that read Ellaville 4 miles, he decided to stop and fix it. That's all it was. Or so he thought. Moments later, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind him. No siren, just spinny. From the rearview mirror, General Hayes watched the deputy step out. Tall, sunglasses on, blonde hair tied back, one hand already resting on her gun. Her name tag read Wilburn. She didn't say hello. No cautious approach. Just walked straight up and tapped hard on the window. License and registration, she snapped. Hayes rolled the window down halfway. Afternoon, officer. I pulled over to check my GPS. She wasn't listening. Her eyes scanned the car. Where you headed? Her voice wasn't curry. Wilburn's tone shifted fast. Step out of the vehicle, she demanded. For checking my GPS. He asked, puzzled. This is private land. Known spot for illegal dumping, she said, hand now gripping her holster tighter. You fit the profile. Profile? He exhaled slowly. Ma'am, I'm a federal officer. My ID is inside the vehicle. She ignored him. Hands on the trunk. He didn't resist. Years in Iraq and Bosnia had trained him for tension like this. But this wasn't war. This was home. And this Woma. A truck slowed nearby. A woman in the passenger seat rolled her window just enough to hold up a phone. Her son in the back was already recording. No one said a word, but they all felt it. Something wasn't right. Hayes kept his hands on the trunk. I'm not resisting, he said calmly. But I'd like to identify myself. I'm Lieutenant General Carlton Hayes. My ID is in my briefcase. Wilburn scoffed. You expect me to believe that? Her voice wasn't professional. It was personal. She radioed in. Wilburn's breathing grew heavier, not from effort, from adrenaline. She called for backup, labeling Hayes a potential threat. Meanwhile, he stood silently, hands still on the car, never raising his voice. His years in uniform had taught him to hold the line, even when no one else did. The teenager filming whispered to his dad, something's not right. His father nodded, eyes locked on Wilburn's every move. You're escalating something that doesn't need to be, Hayes said. You don't tell me. She didn't listen. Instead, Wilburn reached into his back pocket and yanked out his wallet. She flipped through it, fast, careless, until she froze. A Pentagon-issued clearance card, tucked behind his federal ID. She blinked. Where'd you get this? She asked, suddenly unsure. I earned it. Over 30 years of service. She didn't apologize. Didn't back down. You could have just said that in the first place. He stayed calm. I did. Her face reddened. She looked toward her cruiser, grasping for. You calling your lawyer? Wilburn mocked. No, Hayes said steadily. I'm calling the Department of Defense. Her expression cracked, just slightly. She didn't reply. A faint siren echoed in the distance, but she wasn't waiting. She began pacing, muttering into her radio. Across the road, 3 more cars had pulled over. All phones were pointed at her now. She checked her shoulder nervously. She wasn't thinking like a cop anymore, she was reacting like someone losing control. Hayes stood quiet. She moved again, fast this time. Grabbed his wrist. Twisted it back. "You're resisting," she yelled. He winced but didn't fight. "This isn't necessary," he said, voice low. But she didn't care. The cuffs snapped around his wrists, too tight. Gasps came from the crowd. The teenager from earlier whispered to his dad again. The dad raised his own phone and began filming too. Hayes sat in the back of the cruiser, hands behind him, breathing slowly. 1, 2, 3. Control. Calm. She hadn't read him. "You're going to regret this," a voice called out. It was the father standing near the truck. Wilburn barked, "Mind your business, sir." He didn't flinch. "This is my business now." The tension in the air thickened. Hayes sat quietly, his breathing steady. She leaned into her cruiser, fumbled with her radio, her voice now shaky. Across the road, people stood silently, recording. The teenager walked closer. "It says U.S. Army on the jacket," he whispered. "You got that?" His dad asked. "Yeah. Th." 2 more cruisers pulled in, one from county, one state patrol. Deputy Lamar Boyd stepped out, tall with a salt and pepper beard. He didn't rush, didn't draw a weapon. He walked to Wilburn, who tried explaining with flailing arms. Boyd glanced at the cruiser, then walked calmly to the back door. "Sir," he said, "may I ask your name?" Hayes looked up. "Lieutenant General Carlton Hayes, United States Army." Boyd blinked, stunned. "Did she see your ID?" She held it in her hand. Boyd nodded slow. Boyd returned, phone in hand. "Sir, is there anyone you'd like to call?" Hayes nodded. "Just one." Boyd didn't hesitate, handed over his own phone. Cuffed and awkward, Hayes dialed from memory. 1 ring. 2. Major Kendall speaking. Hayes' voice was calm but firm. "This is General Hayes. I'm being unlawfully detained in Schley County, Georgia. I need verification sent immediately." Kendall didn't flinch. "Understood, General. Stay secure." Another voice came on, Commander Reeves. "We're TR." As Hayes ended the call, he handed Boyd's phone back through the open door. Boyd nodded, walked away, and made a quiet call of his own. Wilburn stood nearby, arms crossed, but her confidence was slipping. She glanced at the crowd, at the phones aimed at her, and then back at Hayes, still sitting quietly in the cruiser. 5 minutes passed. Then came the unmistakable sound of large tires on gravel. Not police. 3 black SUVs. No markings, but clearly federal. Doors opened in sync. Men in suit. Colonel Gaines didn't waste time. He marched past everyone and opened the cruiser door himself. "Sir," he said, calm but clipped, "you all right?" Hayes gave a simple nod. "Just bruised pride." Gaines turned to Boyd. "Who's in charge?" "I've only been here 10 minutes, Boyd replied. She made the stop. Gaines turned to Wilburn. "Do you know who that man is?" She hesitated. "He didn't provide proper ID." "You held a Pentagon ID. That's a 3-star general sitting in that car." Her face turned P. 10 minutes later, a dusty county truck pulled in. Sheriff Roger Nix, tall, graying, limping slightly, stepped out slowly. He didn't speak at first, just took in the scene, federal agents, camera phones, and one of his officers looking visibly shaken. "Someone wanna tell me what the hell happened here?" he said, not shouting, but in a voice that carried. Gaines stepped forward. "Sheriff, your deputy unlawfully detained a general." Nix turned to Wilburn. "Tracy, that true?" She mumbled, "He are." Sheriff Nix sighed, deeply. "Tracy, I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave. Badge and firearm, now." Wilburn looked stunned. "Sheriff, that's not a request." Slowly, hands shaking, she unpinned her badge and removed her belt. Nix didn't even look at her as he took them. He turned to the crowd. "Let me be clear, this ain't how we treat people in my county. I don't care who you are, no one deserves what I saw in those videos." A teenager stepped forward, the one who'd filmed it. Hayes quietly stepped out of the cruiser, wrists still red and bruised. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he walked to the back seat of his car, pulled out his jacket, and slipped it on. The stars on his shoulders caught the fading light. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak to the cameras. He just stood tall. When asked if he wanted to press charges, he looked at Wilburn, who now stood in silence, powerless. "Not yet," he said. "I want accountability through proper channels." By the next morning, the video was everywhere. What started as a short clip filmed by a teenager named Miles Reardon had turned into a 2-minute story seen over 2 million times. Hashtags trended, hashtag General Hayes, hashtag Schley County, hashtag profiling on camera. News vans lined Highway 280, their satellite dishes pointed to the sky like something tragic had happened, and in a way, it had. Not with guns or violence, but with silence, with bias, with power used carelessly. Hayes had quietly left that evening. As the video spread, more began to surface. Reports uncovered Wilburn's past complaints, 3 formal grievances, all dismissed quietly. 2 involving black drivers. 1 from a single mother who said Wilburn followed her home and gave her a ticket for improper attitude. The sheriff's office issued a short, cold statement, "We're aware of the incident. It's under internal investigation." But people weren't satisfied. Veterans posted photos of Hayes receiving medals from presidents. Parents T. General Hayes didn't chase cameras. But 3 days later, he stood quietly at a podium in a small veterans forum in Columbus, Georgia. No media was invited, but someone filmed it anyway. He wore his full uniform, hands folded gently. "I've faced hostility on foreign soil," he said. "But I've never felt smaller than I did that day, on a roadside in my own country." He paused. "But I won't carry anger. That's not what this nation needs. What we need is accountability, and honesty. We can't fix W." 2 days later, Sheriff Roger Nix held a closed-door meeting with his staff. He announced the investigation was complete. Officer Tracy Wilburn was terminated. The official reasons: excessive force, failure to follow protocol, and abuse of authority. But behind closed doors, Nix said something heavier: she got caught doing what we all knew she was doing. That's the part that should shame us. Her name disappeared from the badge board. Her desk emptied quietly. There was no ceremony. No farewell. Schley County didn't forget. Schools began hosting discussions on race, respect, and power. Deputies were now required to complete implicit bias training, not as punishment, but as course correction. Sheriff Nix, despite his flaws, brought in outside consultants to help rebuild trust. Not just ex-cops, real people, from real communities, who had lived through profiling. Local panels were formed. Conversations began. They weren't easy. But they were necessary. And back at home, Miles Reardon. General Hayes saw the viral video but said nothing publicly. He returned to Fort Benning and resumed his duties. In the evenings, he'd sit in his office, sometimes replaying the footage in silence. He didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel proud. Just steady. Because for him, justice wasn't loud, it was measured. His cadets noticed something different in him. Not bitterness, but clarity. He wasn't trying to become a symbol. He just wanted people to see what power looked like when it's held high. A few weeks later, Hayes received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference in Tallahassee. It wasn't a military crowd, just teachers, EMTs, students. Everyday people. He accepted, quietly. When he stepped on stage, he wore a dark suit, no stars, no ribbons, just himself. "I want to talk about restraint," he began. "Not silence. Not passivity. Real restraint, the kind that requires strength." He paused. When you're humiliated, everything in you wants to lash out. But true power isn't. From the front row, a young EMT raised her hand. "How did you stay calm that day?" she asked. Hayes smiled gently. "Because my life wasn't in that moment," he said. "It was in everything that came before it. That woman didn't know my story, but I did." The audience sat still, absorbing his words. Later, someone else asked, "Were you angry?" "Yes," he replied. "But I don't carry it. I use it. Anger, when carried, weighs you down. But when you use it right, it sharpens you. It makes you speak WHE." Back in Schley County, things were shifting. Sheriff Nix ordered changes that once seemed unthinkable: bias training, community-led review boards, and new transparency protocols for stops involving use of force. For the first time, town hall meetings were packed. Veterans spoke. Teachers asked questions. Teens shared how the video had opened their eyes. This wasn't reform by pressure, it was reform by realization. Wilbon moved 2 counties over. Found a job in private security. No badge. No. Miles Reardon, the teen who filmed everything, didn't stop at one video. Inspired by what he saw, he started a YouTube channel focused on justice, service, and real stories. His first video, titled "I Didn't Know Who He Was, But I Knew What Was Wrong," crossed 500,000 views in 1 week. He began interviewing veterans, teachers, neighbors, asking simple questions like, "What does integrity mean to you?" His audience grew. And somewhere in Fort Benning, General Hayes watched that video quietly on. Hayes wasn't seeking headlines. He didn't want a medal for staying calm. But he did want something else: truth. Not to punish, but to reveal. When he next addressed a new batch of cadets at Fort Benning, he didn't start with strategy or discipline. He simply said, "You'll wear this uniform with pride. But know this, some will only see what they want to see. Don't let that stop you from standing tall. Power isn't loud. It's steady. And it never forgets." The room went quiet. Not because they we. 3 weeks after it all began, the dust had settled, but the story hadn't faded. People still brought it up in churches, barbershops, and college classrooms. Not just as what happened to General Hayes, but as why does this keep happening? Hayes never played the victim. That wasn't his nature. But he didn't pretend it hadn't happened either. He believed in leading by presence, not volume. In one quiet conversation after another, his story kept spreading. Not as outrage, but as a reminder: Summit. Schley County wasn't perfect, but it had changed. Slowly. Schools made space for difficult conversations. Officers took new oaths that mentioned both law and humility. For the first time, people who'd never trusted law enforcement showed up to listen and speak. Miles, the teenager, now worked part-time editing stories for a local paper. His second big video featured interviews with veterans and students talking about respect. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. And that's why it worked. 1T. That Georgia roadside will never have a plaque. No monument will mark the spot. But those who watched, in person or on screen, will remember. They'll remember the man who stood still when wronged. Who stayed calm when provoked. Who reminded a nation that restraint is not weakness, it's strength. General Hayes didn't change the world in one day. But he held up a mirror. And the reflection made people pause. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers. Through steady breath. Through silent dig.